This elusive and mysterious cryptid stands between 6 to 7 feet tall with a wingspan nearly 12 feet wide. Mothman is a strong, fast-flying cryptid defined primarily by its exceptionally large moth-like wings and a head complete with two huge glowing red eyes. It has 3 sharp claws with opposable thumbs and stands on 2 muscular legs ending in 3-toed, bird-like talons or claws. Witness accounts frequently involve being chased down remote country roads at high rates of speed. In the initial documented encounter, 2 couples were chased in their 57 Chevy Bel Air at speeds reaching 100 miles an hour. This cryptid shows no fear of vehicles or their occupants, although the only damage to date has been to the vehicles themselves. The Mothman is able to leap suddenly into flight at incredible speeds, with its jet black body allowing it to all but disappear against the night sky. The only known physical contact with humans has occurred in and around the TNT bunkers of the nearby abandoned ordnance works, which contains toxic contaminants rumored to have spawned this very creature. Long before 1966, the Point Pleasant region had a fair share of backwoods mysteries, including UFO sightings, strange reports regarding men in black, large unknown creatures, and monstrous noises in the deep woods. From 1942 to 1945, the West Virginia Ordnance Works would produce a massive amount of TNT. There would be 10 lines of production producing 250,000 pounds of TNT per day. There are some that say that the production of TNT at this facility would lead to the contamination and poisoning of the land, and that would further breed this creature known as Mothman. The location of the Ordnance Works places it far north of Point Pleasant itself, which makes it difficult to connect the more popular myth behind Mothman's origin. The more popular myth is that Chief Cornstalk, a very famous and respected Shawnee chief, was murdered at Fort Randolph, which is in present-day Point Pleasant, in an attempt to secure his tribe's neutrality during the American Revolution. It is at this time that some people say that Chief Cornstalk placed a 200-year curse on Point Pleasant itself. There's a third lesser-known origin story for the Mothman, which has a connection between the Ordnance Works and the residents that were forcibly removed from the 8,000-acre area. Prior to 1942, the military forced 150 families from the land so that they could build the bunkers and build the facilities to manufacture TNT. The rumor goes on to suggest that the military, while digging out one of their bunkers, stumbled across a forgotten family plot, a cemetery or makeshift burial ground, and rather than exhume the bodies properly, they simply built the bunker on top of it. This gave rise to either some form of demon or angry spirit which manifests itself into the Mothman. The first known sighting of the Mothman occurred on November 12, 1966. 5 men in Clendenin, West Virginia claimed to have seen a low-flying winged man soaring just above the treetops while they were digging a grave at a nearby cemetery. 3 days later, 2 young couples on a moonlight drive claimed to have witnessed a large winged headless creature standing in the road. This large flying man with a 10-foot wingspan had large glowing red eyes embedded in its shoulders. As they drove closer, the creature quickly disappeared into the surrounding woods, only to appear moments later giving chase to their car as they drove at a high rate of speed down the narrow country road. They could see its glowing red eyes directly behind them despite reaching speeds close to 100 miles per hour. When reporting the incident to police, they stated the terrifying experience took place on the back roads circling the TNT area north of Point Pleasant. They were referring to the abandoned World War II West Virginia Ordnance Works. After the December 15, 1967 collapse of the Silver Bridge and the death of 46 people, the tragedy gave rise to the legend and connected the Mothman sightings to the bridge collapse. The local residents began to have mixed emotions regarding the bridge collapse. Some felt it was disrespectful to connect a monster legend to an obvious engineering and maintenance failure. Others felt to even mention the Mothman would bring bad luck or perhaps even a Mothman curse over the town itself. Over time, the tourism that would generate funds for the small town would create a general acceptance and, for some, a pride in the Mothman legend. The annual Point Pleasant Mothman Festival has generated upwards of $2 million in a single weekend, which is 2 times what the town's local businesses generate in an entire year. The former West Virginia Ordnance Works is a location that locals dubbed the TNT area. It is now an overgrown wildlife preserve located in Mason County, about 7 miles north of Point Pleasant. Part of this over 8,000 acres of land was used as a place to manufacture and store ammunition in World War II. Almost 100 large concrete domes, often called igloos or bunkers, were built into the ground to house the explosives. These were designed to not be noticeable from the air. Soils around the operations industrial area, process facilities, and industrial wastewater disposal system were contaminated with TNT, its byproducts, and asbestos. Buried wastewater lines associated with TNT manufacturing also contained crystalline TNT. After World War II, the government would do a rudimentary cleanup of the location and empty out all of the remaining explosives from the bunkers themselves. A portion of this region would be designated the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. It's 3,655 acres of wildlife management and is occupied by both farmland, wetland, mixed hardland forests, and over 30 marsh-filled ponds. Throughout 1966 and 1967, many West Virginia locals and sightseers flocked to the area in search of the monster. Little did they know that the 2 steam powerhouses, which were removed in 1994, were contaminated with up to 2 inches of asbestos. It was not uncommon for kids in the area to find a piece of greasy, clayish-looking material lying on the ground that was in fact a TNT-laced residue. When the kids would place this against a flat rock and throw another rock at it, it would explode. Despite the threat of decaying asbestos-filled buildings, unexploded residue laying about, and the polluted and acidic-laced ponds, people would commonly travel into this region to hunt and fish for many years. For many decades, the heavily overgrown ruins of the World War II power plant located within the TNT region was thought to be a favorite haunt of the Mothman. More specifically, Mothman witnesses speculated that the creature, which locals then referred to as simply the Bird, lived in a North power plant. The building eventually became known as the Birdhouse. Once the power plant building was deemed a hazard and demolished decades later, Mothman encounters intensified in various bunkers of the region. It was later revealed that the TNT area itself was horribly polluted, and many of the ingredients that went into making the ammunition were dumped and left to seep into the local ponds. The pond, simply known as Number 13, is known for being affected the worst. A woman fishing in that pond discovered a red water seep and pointed it out to wildlife biologist Tom Dotson. He sent it to the lab and discovered that it did contain high levels of TNT. Pink water and red water are 2 distinct types of wastewater associated with trinitrotoluene, also known as TNT. Pink water is produced from equipment washing processes after munitions filling or demilitarization operations, and as such is generally saturated with the maximum amount of TNT that will dissolve in water. about 150 parts per million. Red water, also known as cellite water, is produced during the process used to purify the crude TNT. It has a complex composition containing more than a dozen aromatic compounds, but the principal components are inorganic salts, sodium sulfite, sulfates, nitrite and nitrates, and sulfonated nitroaromatics. In the 1970s, scientists declared the area an environmental disaster, and it became one of the top EPA Superfund cleanup sites. The Division of Natural Resources leased out several dozen of the concrete TNT bunkers in the McClintock Wildlife Management Area to businesses looking for unique types of storage. Unfortunately, on May 17, 2010, an underground storage bunker filled with ammunition exploded in the TNT area. The bunker contained 15,000 to 20,000 pounds of military-issued gunpowder and was leased by Richard King of High Performance Ammunitions. Empty barrels and metal storage boxes were thrown everywhere, some landing as far as 100 feet away in the nearby swamp. The steel doors of the bunker were thrown off, and the ceiling, which was made of more than 6 inches of concrete, lifted up and then caved in. Later that year, the West Virginia State Police and federal authorities temporarily shut down the area. They performed a full sweep of the property looking for illegal or potentially dangerous explosives before reopening the area. It's important to mention that despite all this official activity over the decades, such as the demolition of the North Power Plant or the investigation of all the bunkers for illicit explosives, that there was no documented paranormal activity that was officially mentioned. And in fact, it wouldn't be until after all of these official activities that visitors to the bunkers experienced some form of elevated paranormal activity. In essence, it seems as though the Mothman curse was enacted by all of this activity, and that visitors to these bunkers somehow trigger these events. The Mothman Festival still gives tours of the TNT area each year. Despite the lack of serious research into Mothman itself, there are several research scientists that have generated reports and theories of what is possibly being misidentified as the Mothman. The first attempt from academia to explain what is being misidentified as the Mothman occurred shortly after 2 volunteer firemen said they had an encounter with a large bird that had red eyes. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson commented that he believed the sightings were due to an unusually large heron he termed a shite poke. Herons are sometimes colloquially known as shite pokes due to their habit of lightening their load when they are flushed into flight. Upon further investigation by the county sheriff, contractor Newell Partridge told Johnson that when he aimed a flashlight at a creature in a nearby field, its eyes glowed like bicycle reflectors, and blamed the buzzing noises from his television set and the disappearance of his German Shepherd on the creature itself. Wildlife biologist Dr. Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University told reporters that descriptions and sightings all fit the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as high as a man with a 7-foot wingspan featuring circles of reddish coloring around the eyes, and that the bird may have wandered out of its migration route. Sandhill cranes can fly from 15 to 50 miles per hour depending on wind speed and direction. Cranes fed by humans can become aggressive towards people. In several instances, children have been attacked by cranes. Cranes protecting a nest have been known to chase humans into their homes, attacking window screens and doing other property damage. This initial attempt by scientists to connect the sandhill crane to the Mothman would be expanded upon when other birds were suspected or sighted in the Point Pleasant region, which featured characteristics that fit the Mothman witness accounts. Unfortunately, there appears to be problems with inconsistencies in the Scarberry Mallet witness accounts. There's a much more detailed version of the 57 Bel Air road chase encounter, What follows is considered to be the full account of the famous Bel Air Mothman chase incident.
Some 400 miles across Appalachia sits Point Pleasant, West Virginia. A small town wedged into a spit of land where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers cross. On any given day, Main Street bears little evidence of Point Pleasant's dark secret. A town famous for its flying monster.
There were kids in cars with their parents who saw it. There were teenagers at a bonfire who saw it. There were hundreds of sightings.
We were just out playing in the woods at night, and it looked like a cross between a man and an alien with wings and red eyes. It scared me more than anything that I have ever seen in my life.
Growing up here in Point Pleasant, I've always heard about the Mothman. As you're growing up and people tell you stuff, you start to believe it, but you've always got that doubt in your mind until you go and experience it yourself.
It all began in the late 1960s with sightings of a Mothman monster. First, the location of the sightings. The TNT bunkers, a former bomb-making plant built during World War II.
Well, the TNT area was an entire community, a town within itself. You can still see maps of it and see how it was a top-secret facility for making explosives. But then they let it become overgrown, and the buildings were abandoned, and the igloos were abandoned.
After the war, the government no longer needed the bunkers. They were deserted, except for occasional visits by Point Pleasant teenagers, bored and looking for fun.
We used to hang out and play at the TNT bunkers. That was the only thing to do around here.
In the fall of 1967, high school kids sneaked off to the TNT bunkers for a good time. They encountered something else. Rumors about a Mothman spread quickly through the town.
They were really serious about it and really scared. They had to see something. They were too scared and too emotional not to have seen something. And then, of course, that was the talk of everywhere you went.
While the town was trading stories, one Point Pleasant girl came face to face with something she'll never forget. Faye Laporte grew up in Point Pleasant, dirt poor and one of 14 kids. A family outing to check out the rumors at the TNT bunkers bonded them in a way they never expected.
My brother took us to a movie, and after the movie, we went directly up there because he was going to go find it. And he was going to go up there and catch that thing and prove it was some guys in a costume. Myself, I wasn't worried about really seeing anything because I really didn't believe in it either.
As they drove, the weather turned chilly, the sky dark, with only the moon to guide their way.
We were driving down the drag strip to the TNT bunkers, and my brother kept looking over towards me. And then he turned back, and then he'd look over at me again. I said, well, what are you looking at? He said, well, don't look, but there's something there beside the car.
Don't look.
So I turned and looked. He told me not to.
Don't look.
And there it was, right beside the window, flying right beside the car.
What is that? Get out of here! No!
Everything was just haywire. We were scared.
Then the car came to a screeching halt. That's when they met Mothman.
And that thing jumped on the hood of the car and was just looking at me. We were just more or less immobilized. And the whole time, all you could focus on was his eyes, and they were just so red. It was just beyond any red you could ever find. But when it jumped up, that's when I saw it open up its wings just like an angel. They were that big. They looked like a bird's wings. And they just unfolded, and it just went over them bushes and into the night and was gone.
While the sightings of the Mothman started at the TNT bunkers, a few months later, he was seen on the Silver Bridge, a suspension trestle that links Point Pleasant to Ohio.
There was a stoplight right at the foot of the bridge. It was malfunctioned, and all of these cars piled up on the bridge, and one side of the bridge collapsed, and it dumped one half of the cars into the river, and then the bridge swung back, and the other side collapsed. When the cars were floating in the river, the bridge fell on top of them and crushed them all. It was over in minutes.
It began with a hairline crack in a single eye bar. In the end, 46 people lost their lives. The worst bridge collapse in U.S. history.
A lot of people say the Mothman was here to warn us about the bridge.
He was seen on the bridge a few days before it fell, but like a good omen. So he was big and ugly, people wouldn't cross it.
After the bridge collapse, few wanted to talk about the Mothman. The subject disappeared, replaced with suspicions the town was cursed. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was the setting of a daytime date for Brett Kirby and Jennifer Jeffers. But just when they thought it was going to offer romance, they stumbled upon the Mothman.
He had never been to Point Pleasant, and so he came up here one day, and I took him a tour. It was really exciting, that he came to see me. We went to a few different places around Point Pleasant, and then I told him, I was like, the TNT bunkers, I said, they're out there, and he said, well, what is it? And I was like, well, they're old military bunkers that they used to use, and, they were built on the Indian burial ground.
She just told me that it's haunted and stuff like that. I thought that, it'd probably be kind of romantic and stuff.
As Brett and Jennifer's dates started to heat up, they decided to check out the TNT bunkers, the site of the original Mothman encounters.
The TNT bunkers were where people used to go party when we were younger and in school. Everybody always went out there, and you always heard the stories and stuff, and they always, come back with, we heard this or we heard that. But I thought it was just because they were drunk. I never really believed it.
We arrived at the bunkers, it was probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock. The weather was probably about 75, 80 degrees outside. We went through 3 of them, and on our way back, we stopped back to the second one. When I went back into it and stuff, it felt like it was probably about 10 degrees cooler than what the rest of the bunkers felt like. I did have a real eerie feeling and stuff, and it was just, I felt like unease for some reason. I couldn't pinpoint why.
Wow, this place is pretty neat.
At that moment, there was no sound. The only sound was like him clicking the pictures. And then he had quit clicking the pictures, and we were standing there just listening.
Did you see anything? It's cold in here.
And all of a sudden, something just grabbed my leg real fast. I can actually feel the fingers, and just something just clamp onto my back of my leg. Because when it grabbed me, I spun around and stuff and looked behind me as if it was an animal that was running around or something. It kind of creeped me out because I didn't know what was going on. And I told Jennifer, something just grabbed my leg. And she goes, oh, no, you're just trying to scare me and stuff. And I said, no, something grabbed my leg.
And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something here. I said, I'm out of here. I gotta go. I can't take this. I'm out of here. Because it scared me so bad.
After it happened, I flashed a couple quick pictures to see if there was anything in there with us, and stuff like a mouse or a squirrel or something, just to explain what happened.
We were totally freaked out. It was just something that I had never expected, to happen. We ran back to the car, and then we took off. We went back to his house, and we were looking at the pictures on the computer.
He caught my eye on one of them and stuff, and we went back to it. And the picture had to me, it looked like an apparition. It had like the torso and looked like an arm coming off of it.
My heart just dropped because I was like, oh my gosh, there was something there. There is something there.
First seen that picture, it blew my mind. I had actual evidence on my camera that there was something in that bunker besides me and Jennifer at that time. I mean, it blew me away.
It turned me into a believer because, I've always heard that there is demons that walk upon the earth, but I'd never, really experienced it in myself until that moment.
Despite inconsistencies with the initial Mothman sightings, I do believe the witnesses did indeed see something very unusual. One thing to keep in mind is the first reported sighting claimed Mothman was covered in white feathers, which matches the descriptions of an exceptionally rare, large, snowy owl that was shot and killed near Point Pleasant. One last possible natural answer to the Mothman encounters rests with the barred owls that live throughout the region, which feature the brightest red, reflected eye shine known in the animal kingdom. When in flight or spreading their wings, they tend to tuck their heads down, which along with the red eye shine matches many of the witness descriptions for Mothman. Regardless of attempts to connect the Mothman sightings to misidentified animal encounters, there remain some very odd and terrifying experiences people claim to be having in their own homes after visiting the TNT bunkers. One thing to keep in mind is during the original Bel Air chase, when the teenagers came to report what happened to them to the deputy, Halstead didn't believe them at first, but knew they weren't troublemakers and saw that they were genuinely terrified, so he actually went out to investigate their story. The couples drove back out to the TNT area with the deputy. Millard shined a spotlight around the area, including the tree lines. Deputy Halstead is said to have heard strange static disturbances coming from his radio that he couldn't explain, but he found no clear sign of the creature itself. The witnesses were sitting in the car and said that they saw shadows circling nearby and a cloud of dust kicked up from an adjacent coal yard. The Mallets were too scared to go back to their homes. They stayed at the Scarberry's trailer, turned all the lights on, and stayed awake all night from fear. The following day, Sheriff George Johnson held a press conference to discuss the sightings. The local press began printing the story and named the creature Mothman, based on the comic book character Batman, who had just gotten a television series at the time. Steve Mallet told the local newspaper, "We understand people are laughing at us, but we wouldn't make all this up just to make us look like fools." That same day, the couples went back to the TNT area during daylight and found odd-looking tracks resembling two horseshoes put together, but smooth. Steve saw something fly up inside a boiler when a door was kicked open. No one stayed around long enough to see what it was. After this original sighting, more and more people began reporting seeing similar things, such as Marcella Bennett's sighting, which happened a day later. There were hundreds of cars full of eager people swarming out to the TNT area at night in hopes of seeing the Mothman. A shadow was cast over the valley of Point Pleasant, and thus began the legacy of West Virginia's Mothman. There has been claims by several couples that a Mothman haunting curse lingers around those that visit the abandoned buildings and the bunkers of the TNT region. Many of these claims have similar characteristics that defy a logical animal connection and hinge more on the paranormal type of experience. No matter what conclusions one can draw about Mothman, The TNT bunkers north of Point Pleasant present a hauntingly eerie wilderness that has some sort of strange impact on many that have ventured into it.